Are you a cool accountant? Do you use Zapier? You ever feel like Zapier is kind of that tool that accountants use to flex to show how cool they are, how tech-enabled they are? Well, let's double down on that generalization this week and talk Zapier. More generically, API connectors, which is now a whole subset of tools. Specifically, I'm gonna show you how to use Zapier and Integromat, kind of the two leading tools in this space. This is the third part of an 8-week series I did. You can get continuing education credits for it. Information in the link below. I'm releasing these sessions week over week, so I got a whole playlist of them. But this is a biggie. You'll learn how to build your own API integrations. Because that native one that doesn't quite do what you want it to do, that's annoying. So without further ado, API connectors.
All right, week 3, we are cruising right through this, aren't we? API connectors. This is a big one. You know, last week's Airtable was a big one. This is a really big one, as I think we're all, to varying degrees, investing in the cloud, and we aren't yet leveraging that connectedness of the cloud. There's native integrations that our vendors are building for us, but man, there are so many more opportunities when we learn to be able to put those things together ourselves. I'll give you this disclaimer. Hopefully I'm giving this to you every week. This is well and truly a crash course. And so after the 8 weeks, we'll go deeper on the things that people want to go deeper on. I'm already working on kind of some follow-on content, but just recognize when you come out of this week, you're going to have kind of the basic tool belt to be able to do stuff yourself. But these are all deep, like meaty subjects that we're just kind of getting into. Okay, so API connectors, whoosh. I use Integromat in my business really heavily, but I know Zapier is like, it's almost like QuickBooks to zero. Zapier is what most people are familiar with. What is your comfort level with API connectors? And I just started the vote. Okay, so most people have used API connectors to some degree, a few that are scared, a few that are pros. That's a good mix. Even for the pros, I think we're kind of talking about some different things where hopefully this is still valuable for you. So a reminder, API connectors, your tools on the web talk to each other via API. So when Bill.com pushes a bill to QBO, or when you make a bill update in QBO that pushes back to Bill.com, all that stuff's happening via APIs. Actually goes a step further than that. The way a lot of SaaS tools are developed, you have a back end, and their front end is even just leveraging an API to display all of the things in the way that you're used to seeing them. So this is kind of akin to like when you first take your business digital and you're using digital work papers and that sort of thing. When you first go digital, you're really just doing the exact same thing you were doing on paper in a digital way. So you're manipulating PDFs just as if they were paper documents, because you're not yet leaning into what it is about that format that's better. And so there's a lot of people investing in cloud right now, which is good, and moving their clients and their processes to cloud-based tools. And those cloud-based tools have native integrations. And usually that's the big selling point, is I can use this stack, we call them, and these stacks have great native integrations. Well, the reality is every single one of these tools have a whole load of API endpoints. And API integrators give you the power to build your own integrations. And that's much, much, much more powerful than having to rely on the native integrations that are built into the tool. So it's like, it's very much a big step from just starting out with cloud tools and relying on native integrations. How API requests work. The tools that we use to connect APIs like Zapier and Integromat manage most of this for you, but you'll still find you spend a lot of time troubleshooting when something isn't working the way you'd expect it to. And if you have a fundamental understanding of what's happening, that can be helpful when it comes to troubleshooting. Fundamentally, this is how API requests work. The URL is the address of the server you're making a request of. So right now, this URL in my browser made a request of the Miro servers at this address, and the response is what's being displayed in the browser here. Same thing applies for API requests. You still need to know where that API request goes to. Second, the method. There are more methods than this, but these are generally going to be the ones that you're using. So get method is asking for data. Posting is creating new data. Put is updating existing data. Delete is removing data altogether. Somebody always finds the one thing that I didn't lock on the Miro board, right? Headers. So this is like context for the request. So it's, some metadata like when was the request made, but also like what gives you the right to have access to this data. So authentication and kind of the metadata around the request itself. And then lastly, the body is the specifics of what you're requesting. So let's say you were doing a put to update a invoice in Xero, what invoice you wanted to update, the specifics of the data that you wanted to put in would be part of that body. The two tools we're going to talk about today, here's a quick comparison of them. Zapier, it's easy. It's the most mature. There's lots of learning resources because it's a mature tool. There's a great list of apps that Zapier supports. So there's a ton of API integrators out there. The issue with most of them is they don't integrate with that many apps, and they're really not making your life easier if they don't connect to the apps that you already use. Zapier thankfully has thousands of apps. Like I said, most widely known. Downside is it can be expensive at scale. Depends how you define expensive, because this is still really valuable if it's doing real work for you that you would otherwise need to pay somebody to do or do yourself. But in the grand scheme of API connectors, it's fairly expensive. So Integromat is probably now the second most well-known out there. They give you very detailed instructions by app, which Zapier actually doesn't do. So it actually has like a dedicated support page for every single app to help you understand how every API endpoint works. And I find myself using that a lot. So that's really helpful. I think they have just as many apps as Zapier at this point. They have a visual process designer, which we'll talk about, that's a little different, that makes it easier to build larger processes, and it's much less expensive. How do we test it with a common thing that we all have right now? Right now, we all have Airtable. So we'll start with that. And then as we get to the end, we're going to talk about what is a workflow that makes sense for you and a collection, the unique collection of apps that you use. So I'm going to have you click on this Airtable link here, and I've got an example base that we're going to use. Okay, so copy base, and it's going to pull a copy of that base into your Airtable like so, and you just select what workspace you want to add it to. So you should see a new client intake template base here. So the idea here is you have a form on your website for new client inquiries. They want to learn more about what you do and start a conversation. And every time they complete that form, it adds a record to this base. And we've got a few example records in here, but it's all the basic stuff you would collect from a new client. So first name, last name, do you own a business? What's the name of your business? What is their contact email? What's the business type? That's actually a link to the other table we'll look at in a minute. And then what I'm doing here is like some very high level like vetting of this client. Is this a good fit for me? So you think about the factors when you pick up a client that would dictate, is this a good match for my firm or not? I've got in here, what's your annual revenue? Maybe I'm really good with new businesses, or maybe I work more with mature businesses. What accounting system are you on? I know we all have strong opinions on that. And then based on that, there's a formula field here that's going to calculate a score. How this is calculated is not really that important, but this is actually a cool reflection of the flexibility of Airtable and how you can kind of design your own scoring system. So this is factoring in what system they're on, because I have one system I like more than the other. They're going to get a higher score if they have more revenue. And they're also going to get a higher score depending on the business type. I think I've got S Corps, scoring the highest here and 1040 scoring the lowest. So this top person who's a 1040 client, their score is 0. This person has the highest score, I think, because they're higher revenue, but you get the idea there. So this business type, this references to another table. If you remember back to the Airtable week, we talked about relational tables and the value of separating those things out. I've just got 3 types in here. In reality, you would have more, but we've got basically the tax or the entity type. And then we've also got who's my in-house expert on this type of engagement that I would send the client to. And here I've got the email address for my in-house people. So Jane is the expert on S Corp. So I've got that here, and then the Calendly link for each of these people as well. Back to the client table. The last couple fields here are lookup fields to that other table. So because this guy is a 1040 client, then Jan is going to be my in-house expert that I connected them with. And that's a lookup field looking over to the type table. And here is Jan's Calendly link. That is the Airtable base that we're going to be building API integrations off of in Zapier and in Integromat. So let's dive into Zapier. So this is the Zapier, I guess, kind of Zap designer. And your Zaps are always going to start with a trigger. And that's going to be true of any API connector. You're always going to have a trigger that starts that process, and then any number of steps that you design thereafter. So you see the number 1, choose a trigger, and then down here below, we will later define actions. So our trigger is going to be a new client inquiry has been submitted from the website. And when they do that via the form, it's going to drop a new record into our base here. So our trigger app is going to be Airtable. So type Airtable in there. It's going to pull Airtable up. And we're going to define the trigger event as new record. Now, if we wanted to get fancy with this, we could use, like new record in a view. And, maybe we create a secondary grid view here, and you don't have to do this. I'll just show you, and say vetted prospects. And maybe in this view, we only include prospects where the score is greater than or equal to 20. So I'm going to say the score is greater than or equal to 20. And so that's throwing out the 1040 guy. So if we only wanted this to trigger on those higher score clients, we could instead use new record and view and point it to this specific view. But in this case, I'm going to keep things simple. We'll point it to the vanilla grid view, and I'm just going to say new record. So we are connected to Airtable, or we've chosen the Airtable app, and the trigger is new record. Now you're going to need to link your Airtable to your Zapier. So I've already got this in here, but here's how you can do this if you've not already. So you hit the drop down, you're going to say add new account. This blue button here. It's going to pop up a helpful little window. And all you need to provide Zapier with is the API key from your Airtable. And it actually will link you directly to the page that has that API key. So click the account page. The address is just airtable.com/account. And your API key lives in this field here. So if you click into this field, it'll show the API key. Copy that sucker and paste it back into this little Zapier pop-up. So this is taking care of the authentication between Zapier and Airtable, because Airtable is not just going to let anybody in to access this data. By providing it with the API key, you're giving Zapier permission to talk to Airtable and vice versa. Okay, I'm going to X out of that because I have already got mine connected. Okay, you got to select the base that you want to be the trigger. So scroll down to client intake template. It's probably going to be at the bottom since you just added it. And then the table inside of the base, if you remember, that's basically the tab inside the base. That is client, not business type. So we are referencing the client intake template and the client table inside of that base. And the last thing, anytime you set up a trigger or an action in Zapier, is it's going to test that step. You want to test these individually before you plug them all together and flip the switch to turn it on. And so I'm going to say test this, and it's going to go out and pull a record. So in my case, it pulled record C. And down here, you can see all of the specifics of that record. So their annual revenue, they're on QuickBooks Online. The business name is Gloria's Online Marketing, etc. So your trigger is done. I'm going to say continue, and that's that. And now it's pulled us down to choose an action. So we define the trigger. what's going to cause this process to start. And now we're going to define an action. And this is kind of the cool part, is you can set up any number of these. So what we're going to do here is we need to respond to this person in kind of a timely manner and acknowledge that we got their inquiry and give them a kind of a place to dictate what the next steps are going to be. So we're going to keep this simple. We're just going to send this person an email. Now, there's a lot of different ways to do email inside of Zapier. The best place to start is probably just with whatever your normal email provider is, be it Gmail or Office 365. So if you're Office 365, you can say Microsoft Office 365. I have all my Realize stuff on G Suite, so I'm going to say Gmail. That being said, the more you do this stuff, the more you find yourself using email to handle a lot of things. And so there are other tools that are dedicated for like high volume email. Like I use Mailgun, and that gets me like 20,000 free emails a month or something like that. And that's just like a high volume mail tool. As you do a lot of this stuff, if you have processes running in the background all of the time, and it's sending out, several hundred emails a day, before long, your sent box and that stuff just kind of becomes a mess. And there is value in separating that stuff. But for now, use whatever your normal email provider is. I'm going to say Gmail. And regardless of the provider, the action event is going to be something along the lines of send an email or create a draft and send email. And then the next step is going to have you authenticate to your email service. Blue continue button. And then we're going to define what that email actually is. So who do you want to send the email to? When we click this field, it's going to pull up the data from the previous steps. So I've clicked into the to field, and there's a group here for step number 1, new record and Airtable. And you can toggle to collapse and expand that. You can say show all options, and it'll show every single record from that Airtable record that got pulled in. In this case, who we want to reach out to is Gloria@example.com, because that's the email address that she provided. You could copy somebody else on this if you wanted to. I'm not going to. Some email services let you choose where it looks like that email is coming from. I'm just going to say Jason at Launch FA. And then you can define the subject here. So I'm just going to use a generic subject. So let's just say, thanks for reaching out. So you define the body of your email address down here. Gmail defaults to plain type email. You can toggle between plain and HTML if you want to style it a specific way. I'm just going to leave this plain. And I'm going to say hello. And then I'm going to pull in their first name from the Airtable form they submitted. So I'm going to say hello, and that's going to pull in Gloria dynamically, or whatever first name they put in. I'm going to say, thanks for reaching out about accounting services. We would love to learn more about you. Please schedule a follow-up meeting with the following link. Now, I'm going to show all options here, and I'm going to pull in the Calendly link of the expert on my team for that type of business. Just going to finish that with regards, the team, or the whatever your business name is, team. So boilerplate message, pulling in 2 variables from the form that they submitted. You've got some other stuff you can do here, like, if you use a specific signature, you can load that into here, file attachments, that sort of thing. I'm going to gloss over all that. I want to test this, but I'm not actually at the Gloria@example.com domain. I don't know who Gloria actually is. I'm actually going to swap this out for my own email address for test purposes, just so that I can ensure that this comes through as I expect it to. So that to address, you may want to change to yourself, because we're going to test that now to ensure that comes through correctly. So the last step is to test it out. I'm going to say test and review. And if you changed that recipient email address to yourself, you should have an email come through. So I got this email. Thanks for reaching out. Hello, Gloria. So it pulled in the name from the form. Thanks for reaching out about accounting services. We would love to learn more about you. Please schedule a follow-up meeting with the following link, calendly.com/Jane. So you could turn that on and be done there. You probably want to change the recipient to not be yourself, but you've created a really simple Zap. So your trigger is when somebody submits a form on your website, you gather the relevant details that you care about. Don't copy what I did. Figure out what are the determining factors that decide if I want to work with a person or not. Put that into the form without, being so long that they're not going to finish it. And then contextually, based on that, you can build a response email. Now, reality is you would probably build a little bit more logic into it than this. On a Zapier free plan, you can only have a 2-step Zap, so you can't have any other steps than this. I'm not on a free plan, but to give you an example of additional things you would probably do to build this out a little bit further, I would probably send another email or somehow contact the team member that was the designated expert. So let's say I'm going to send another email to whoever the designated expert was on that record. So I'm going to select 2. And then now I've got 2 steps here that I can pull variables from, but we're going back to the first Airtable record. I'm going to say show all options and expert email address. So I'm going to email Jane at my business. Subject's going to be new client inquiry. And I want to give Jane everything that she needs. You don't need to follow along on this. I don't think you actually can if you're on the free plan. I'm going to give Jane all the info that she needs prior to meeting with this client so that everything the client submitted in the form, I can include in this email. So I can say, hello, we've received a new client inquiry. Here are the specifics, name. So I can pull their first and last name in here. First space, last name, business name, annual revenue, etc. So I'm probably going to end that message after putting in all the details with something along the lines of, please follow up with this person if you haven't heard from them in a couple of days. So now, whenever a client submits this form on my website, not only is that client going to get an email, but that person on my team who's going to connect with them, they're going to get an email as well that says, hey, follow up with them if you haven't had a Calendly appointment come through in the next couple of days. So a couple other things you could do. You could delay this. If they send this to you at 1 a.m. and this responds at 1:03 a.m, you might look like a weirdo. So you could add a step in here that is, a delay. So these are kind of built-in helper steps from Zapier. So we could use delay by Zapier and say delay for, 8 hours or something like that to make it look a little more human. The one thing you don't want to have happen here is this feel like a really kind of robotic experience. But this is going to delay it for 8 hours. You may still end up looking like a weirdo if they submitted it at noon, and this means it's going to, or 4 p.m, and this means it's going to send in the middle of the night. Probably want to do something smarter there to maybe the best thing to do here is to just have these go out once a day at a reasonable time, like 9 a.m. or something like that. So it's going to look like an actual person is sending it. You could also add a filter here. So similar to how we set up that filter in our Airtable base, you could also filter at the Zapier level and say the score has to be greater than, let's say greater than 19, because we really want it to be 20 or more. This just step in one and two. That's probably better than nothing, but you could build some more logic around that to make it feel even a little more human. I think we've all made the mistake of letting that new inquiry sit a little bit too long. And I've seen some kind of like wild statistics about like a very high percentage of the time, if somebody reaches out to several providers, they go to work with the first one to respond. So if you can make a response have a customized human feel, which here it's very customized because they're getting the contact info of the subject matter expert. It's not just a vanilla response. That's going to reflect obviously very positively on you when they make their buying decisions. So if you were ready to roll, you would simply toggle it on. And then anytime there was a new record here, it would start triggering. One other really cool thing Zapier does actually is you can share any of these things. So if somebody in the community made a killer Zap, they could share this link and anybody could pull it up in their Zapier. Obviously, it's not going to be connected to that specific person's accounts anymore, but the outline of it, you would be able to pull in and then connect your own accounts to it. So if you think about the kind of stuff we could build, the kind of like recipes we could develop that would be helpful, and then build kind of this resource base of recipes that people are leveraging, that's actually a pretty cool thing I think that we could do in community. So that is Zapier Crash Course. Hopefully you've got your Integromat account set up already. So fundamentally, they're both API connectors. Integromat's a little more of the, was not the first one of the party, not the first one to get all the attention. So they're coming in with a lower cost, more flexible option. Not going to really dig into this too much. Let's dive right into scenarios. Scenarios are the equivalent of Zaps in Integromat, and we're going to say create a new scenario. So just about everybody I show Integromat gets really pumped because I think it's a more visual, easier to understand tool than Zapier. The first step it's going to do, I may have gone through that quickly. So once you're inside of Integromat, click scenarios on the left-hand side here, and then I'm just going to click the big blue button here to create a new scenario. Now, first step is to pull in the tools that you want to use. You can still do it later, so it's not that big of a deal, but we're going to use AirTable, and I'm going to use Gmail, but you could use whatever email provider you want. I think Office 365 is called Microsoft 365 email is what it's called. So if that's your email client of choice, you would want to pull that one in. So immediately you're taken into more of a kind of canvas, not like a linear feeling flow. And so it may be hard to see here, but this is a white little node. The first node is going to be your trigger. And so I'm going to use Airtable. And the trigger we're going to use is watch records. So they actually just added watch responses the other day, which might be better for this, but I haven't tested it yet. So let's roll with watch records. So you'll see it's added this Airtable node now, and this is a infinite canvas. So you can expand this to be any number of nodes with branching logic, and build entire business processes in here. And to me, a way that's more simple to visually understand. Let's build out what we just built out in Integromat. You can see kind of the similarities and the differences. So first thing you need to set up is your authentication, just like we did with Zapier. I've already got a connection here, but you just need to say add. And then that same API token, you're just going to copy and paste right into here. So that was at Airtable/account. You click into this field, copy that guy, and you just paste it into this field and then say continue. First thing you have to do is select the base that you're working out of. So it's probably going to be at the bottom, client intake template. And this is going to feel just like the Zapier steps we went through, but it's going to happen in a single kind of pop-up dialog box here. So the table we want to use is client. Now, how this is going to trigger is based on a created or modified time field that's in Airtable. So if I pop over to Airtable, I've got a when submitted field. And so the way that Integromat is going to determine if it's a new record is it will look at the last time that process ran and whether there's any records with a when submitted date time after that. So the trigger field we're going to set to when submitted. Label field, not that big of a deal. I usually just set this to the ID. And then it's asking, do you want to limit the number of records that it returns? 10's probably fine. It's always good to have a limit here in case you bungle something up and it pulls thousands of things in that maybe you don't actually want. And then these last couple of options allow you to filter it further if you want. Kind of like we talked about with Zapier, you could filter it to a vetted prospects view if you wanted. You can even put custom formulas in here. And so these are Airtable syntax formulas that match the type of formula you would put in a formula field here. So this is how I'm calculating the score. It's business type score plus annual revenue score plus accounting system score. Those fields are all hidden. But you could use this same syntax to define a filter directly inside of Integromat. So I could use curly bracket score when it's greater than 20 or something like that. So that gives you a lot of flexibility. I'm not actually going to do that in this case. I want to pull in all 3 records. So I hit OK there. Now it's going to ask me where I want to start. Do I just want to process records from now on from a specific date? Choose them manually. I'm just going to say all because I want to process all 3 of them. Now is where the fun begins. So Zapier, straight out of the gate on the free plan, is going to limit you to 2 step flows. You can go wild in Integromat on the free plan. You can use as many as you want. It's a totally different pricing model, which I appreciate. We're going to add another module here and just add your email client. So just like we did in Zapier, we're going to send an email. Depending on the client you're using, it's going to be something along the lines of send an email. First thing you need to do is add authentication. So I've already got this here for Launch FA, but you click the add button here, and it's going to take you to pretty much the same thing that Zapier took you through. It'll have you log into a specific account. So just like Zapier, we got to define who we're sending the message to. So these steps may look a teeny bit different depending on your email provider. I'm going to click add a recipient, and then I'm going to put in the email from the watch record step. So these are all the variables from this Airtable step number 1. You see the little 1 box, and that's going to line up with the 1 box on the node there. So these are all the variables that we can pull from that step. Obviously, if you have a whole bunch of steps, this is going to be a whole bunch of things. But we're just going to pull their email address in here and say add. So whatever email comes through the record will now be mapped to this to field. Subject, thanks for reaching out. And then the content here, you're going to put in, pretty much what we did before. Hello, please schedule a meeting here. I'll just drop the Calendly link in here. Expert Calendly. So obviously you'll build that out a little more if you actually use this. I want to test this. I'm going to change the email back to my own email so that I receive it for testing purposes, jason@launchfa.com. And I'm going to hit OK. And that's it. And to test it, you hit this little blue run once kind of play icon here in the bottom left. So I'm going to hit run once, and hopefully that works. Okay. So it triggered once, and then it sent an email 3 times. And that's because there's 3 records in play here. So a nice thing about Integromat is you can click on these little bubbles, and it'll give you helpful information about what it just did. So I'm going to click on this 1. We see output here, and then bundle 1. I'm going to collapse that. There's 3 bundles here. Bundles is what Integromat calls kind of batches of information. Let's look at bundle 1. These are just the records that it pulled from Airtable. So Gloria's online marketing, annual revenue, 100,000, etc. So it queried Airtable once, and because it pulled 3 bundles, it ran the subsequent step 3 times. So it sent 3 emails, and I can click on this and it'll give me the specifics of those emails. So the first one was to me because everything's going to me. Hello, please schedule a meeting here. Calendly Jane. 2 is probably going to be a different Calendly. Yeah, Calendly Jan. And then Calendly Tim. So just sent 3 emails. I guess I can pull that up here. Thanks for reaching out. Please schedule a meeting here. So that's pretty straightforward. Here's kind of what I appreciate about Integromat. So I'm going to pull this out a little bit, pull this second node out to make a little space. I'm going to right click this little doodad that's connecting them and say unlink. That's going to remove the connection between them. And then I'm going to add my own connection here. So I'm going to hit the little green kind of gear cog on the bottom of the screen here, flow control. And I'm going to select router. So that's added a new little node here. And I'm going to drag it over next to my Airtable so that these 2 things connect. And then I'm going to pull my Gmail over here next to it so that the router connects to Gmail. Now, if I hover over router, there's a plus icon here, and I can add another path. So this can be kind of finicky as you're dragging them around. Sometimes it will connect in ways that you don't want it to actually connect. If you have, a bunch of white nodes here that you don't want, you can right click them and say delete the module. If it made a connection that you didn't want, you can always right click the connection and say unlink, but sometimes dragging and it like kind of guessing how you want to do it isn't always right. And so you have to manually change stuff. So basically we've got two paths here, and maybe the second path is if they don't score high enough. So I'm going to add another Gmail or whatever you use, email here, kind of leave that as a placeholder. So this top path is going to be, they are vetted. Right now, I think I want to work with them, or they've at least scored high enough for me to take them to the next step. This path down here is they didn't score high enough. We're not a great fit, but I don't totally want to ghost them. And so that will come down to this path. If you're super OCD like me, there's a little magic wand right here, auto align. Look at that. How neat is that? Okay, so how do we define the logic to say what path should it go down? Well, you click the little wrench here on the path between nodes to set up a filter for that path. So I'm going to click this and say set up a filter. And this is going to go to the top email that we set up that sends them a Calendly invite. I'm going to say set up a filter. You set a label. We're going to call this qualified lead. And then the condition, we're going to drop the score in here from Airtable. Hit the score. And then you set the, I guess, what is the operator, I guess you want to use. And I'm going to say, I want the score to be greater than or equal to 20. So basic operator text, I'm going to scroll down to numeric operators and say greater than or equal to. Greater than or equal to 20. You can add any number of, additional rules if you want, but we're just going to roll with that one rule. So I've got score greater than or equal to 20. I hit OK. And now it's going to show the label on that path, which is helpful. Now for the second path, I really just want it to go down that path anytime it didn't go down the other path. So I'm going to hit the wrench, set up a filter, add a label, say non-qualified lead. And then if you check the box right below this, it's going to make it the fallback route, which, if you had 5 paths above that with different sets of logic, that fallback route is always just going to be where it goes if it didn't meet any of the other kind of conditions. So I'm just going to set that to be the fallback route, and that's all I have to do. So I never actually defined what this email is down here. I'm going to say, sorry, we're not a great fit. I'll just leave it at that for now. You would normally map this to, the email address from Airtable, but I'm just going to set it to myself for testing purposes, jason@launchfa.com. So let's test this out. If we look at our Airtable base and the scores they had, one had 0, one had 66, one had 51. So we should have 2 go down this upper path and 1 go down this lower path. Now I'm going to hit run once, but it's not actually going to run because it's already processed all the records that are in there. So you'll see there's only a bubble here. It never actually went past that. It's because all the records have already been processed. And that's so that you're not redoing the same things, sending the same emails. But I can right click it and say, choose where to start. And I'm going to say, run it on all of them again. So that's going to start from scratch. It's going to run it on all 3. I hit OK, and then I hit play. And it's going to pull all 3 of those records again. You see it went up to the first on the first run, went down to the second on the second run, and went up on the top branch again for the third one. So this threw out the one low scoring client, or it sent them, a message saying that we're not a great fit. And then for the 2 that were a good fit, it sent them a Calendly link. Pretty cool. So this can get pretty gnarly. You can build some pretty big stuff with this, as you can imagine. This could be 100+ nodes. There are, entire business processes you can build with this, and that's pretty cool. Just kind of wrap things up here and just put Zapier and Integromat side by side. So the lowest tiers on both of these tools, they both have a free tier. The first tier for Zapier is 20. The first for Integromat is 9. Your free tier of Zapier is pretty limited. You only get 5 zaps. So those are standalone processes. They can only have a single step after the trigger. You can run them 100 times a month, basically, and there's no premium apps. Like I think QuickBooks and Xero are premium apps, so it won't actually let you use those. No webhooks, which we're going to talk about more in later weeks. And it basically runs every 15 minutes. Going up to $20, you get some more zaps. You get multi-step, as many steps as you want. 3 premium apps still, which seems weird and arbitrary to me. With Integromat, it's measured by operations. And so this thing we just ran, these bubbles basically tell you how many operations it consumes. So it processed 3 of these records. That was 1, 2, 3, 4 operations that process just consumed. Free gets you 1,000 operations a month. I'm running like 200 Integromat processes for my firm at $9 a month. It's like a stupidly good value, but even the free tier doesn't limit you to a number of nodes or to specific apps. It lets you use webhooks. But anyways, those are the 2 kind of main players. I use both in reality. If I'm going to show one to a client, it's kind of the QuickBooks and Xero thing where QuickBooks or Zapier is kind of synonymous with API integrations right now, and that may be the only thing they know. And honestly, it's a good place to start. Zapier is easy. That's a pretty safe place to start. Just something to be aware of. Okay, I'm going to hit the next time, and then we're going to do one more thing that's going to take us into the sunset here. So next time, we're talking web forms. Web forms may seem innocuous, but think about what percentage of your time you spend emailing back and forth requesting information from people. It's insane. It's like 50% of this profession is you and a bunch of staff people asking clients for things and sending these emails back and forth that are not value add emails. They're simply trying to get the stuff that we need to do our job. And all of the web services that you use, they're really just web forms built into websites. So they're leveraging web forms to capture things in standardized ways. And we have so far to go to leverage web forms in an automated way to collect things in a way that's not bouncing emails back and forth. Now, web forms, if all you know is web forms, those are pretty useful. They let you capture things in a standardized way, right? Like you can capture the data to complete a 1099 or something else like that. When you know the other things we're talking about, like how to host, micro databases and Airtable and API connectors and that sort of thing, web forms become way more powerful because you can not only collect the data, you can automate actions that you take on the data. So just using that example we just had, we put a web form on our website to collect a new client intake info. And then we can take any number of steps off of that. But if you think about like recurring client requests, stuff like that, web forms become crazy powerful because you can automate, where that info goes, like to Dropbox or something like that, and then logic to define the steps you take based on those responses. Pretty cool. So we're going to be talking about Typeform and Airtable, how to set those forms up in app. And then we're even going to use Integromat to create bespoke Typeform forms. So you actually build a one-off custom form for somebody based on underlying data. So I talked about this when I was putting that client info request thing out there. We talked about this a bit when Varun was talking how next to use kind of Typeform, right? So we're not only going to build a couple forms in app, we're going to build a form via the API, which is like a really powerful thing because it means every single form you send to somebody can be custom and specific to that person. Okay, last thing we're going to do to kind of get your brain thinking about, man, what are the applications for API connectors for me? Hop back into Zapier. Hopefully you've still got it open. And this is a really cool thing that Zapier has. Go to Explore. What are all the ones that you use that you see here? So I use Google Sheets, Gmail, Slack, Google Calendar, Twitter, Airtable, Typeform. You can add the ones that we're going to be using in here too. Calendly, QuickBooks, and Xero. We haven't even talked about accounting systems and what the ways that you can leverage API integrations for your client accounting. But start pulling in the things that you got here. So I just kind of quickly cruise through the things I have. Now, you load all those things into there. And at the bottom here, it's aggregating the most popular processes based on all of the tools that you just put in. So for all of the people that use the tools you do, here are the ways that they're leveraging Zapier right now. So for me, evidently, the most popular thing is to send a customized email via Gmail and get alerts in Slack. And it starts with Airtable. That's actually really funny because that's like exactly what we just built. So something happened in Airtable, and then we sent a customized Gmail. Second one for me is save new Gmail emails matching certain traits to a Google spreadsheet. I don't know, maybe that's a good idea. Click through these, a lot of really cool things in here to kind of get your gears turning on what are the ways that I can use the apps that I already have, that I'm not using them right now. Yes, John, they both integrate with ShareFile. You start thinking about like file management, and if you have e-sign tools that integrate with this, like, man, what if you could trigger something off your 8879s being signed, filing those automatically, stuff like that. Some pretty cool possibilities there. So yeah, I'm actually in this tax season, I'm kind of exploring how do I leverage ShareFile better. Yeah, add new QBO customer to MailChimp. So that client intake thing we just did, I've got a version of that in my system. And every time somebody comes to us, I actually add them to our email list, because whether they're a client or not, I'm happy to add them there.
How about that? This one opened up kind of the cloud world for a lot of people, I think. The idea that anything with an API, man, I can connect that myself. Pretty powerful concept and liberating to not be subject to just what the native integrations are. So that was week 3 of 8. I'm releasing these sessions week over week. Be sure to hit subscribe to catch the future ones. And if you aren't yet on it, get on my weekly newsletter for accountants that geek on stuff just like this.